currently in our project, we have a way to track the progress of individual activities. So for example, if I'm going to start tracking the time for some activity, then on the progress page, I will be able to see how progress scale is growing for this activity. But what about of total progress of all activities? We should be able to track the total progress of the day as well. And this progress should be displayed at the top right in this header. So the component which shows this label is called the header progress. If we open up this component, we will see that here we have Vue directive that currently has static value true, and that is why we have day complete progress always shown. But now we're going to have to make this behavior dynamic, so that based on some percentage variable, which is going to hold the percentage of completion of all activities at once. And if this percentage will be less than 100, that means we haven't finished this day yet. And instead of showing the complete label, we're gonna show current progress of the day. So let's use this code in here. Otherwise, we're gonna show the complete label, which means that we have completely finished this day. So right next to the percentage value, we also have this div which shows progress indicator. And the color of this progress indicator should be dynamic, so instead of hard-coding red color, we're going to use variable color class. Let's interpolate this variable in here. And basically this behavior is very similar to what we have done inside progress item component, where we were dynamically assigning the color for individual progress scales. And to obtain completion percentage for individual activities, as well as color class, we have used composable function useProgress, and something similar we can implement for total completion percentage. So let's just go back to the header progress component, and right here, instead of showing this hard-coded value of percentage, 20%, we're gonna use dynamic value percentage variable. And now let's copy an example of using this composable function useProgress and paste it into the header progress component. But in this case, we don't need to use tracked seconds variable. Let's remove it from here. And since this behavior of calculating total percentage will be drastically different from the percentage calculation of individual activities, we will use different composable function, and we'll call this function useTotalProgress. We don't need to pass any parameters into this function. Let's remove this param. And now we also have to import one more constant in this file called 100%, since this constant is used in the template. And of course, let's add an import for our new composable function useTotalProgress. I'm gonna copy over an import from here, paste it into the header progress file, and change function name, as well as pass. The file with this composable will be called TotalProgress. And now let's just make a copy of the progress file and create new file called TotalProgress. Right away I'm going to rename this composable function on useTotalProgress, which is not supposed to accept any params. Let's also scroll down where we return the value from this composable and remove variable tracked seconds. We don't need this in this composable. And now we're slowly getting to the most important functionality, calculation of percentage of total amount of seconds tracked for all activities, as well as calculation of total amount of tracked time. Let's actually comment out this percentage in order not to get any errors in the browser. Switch over to the browser and let's see what we're about to calculate now. So total amount of tracked time for all activities will be the sum of all these numbers, and total amount of time we need to spend for all activities is the sum of these numbers. And then having those two numbers, we will be able to calculate the percentage of the total amount of tracked time for all activities and show this percentage right here. So let's start with calculating the sum of the tracked time for all activities. Now I'm going to create computed property in this composable function called total tracked seconds. And the way we're about to calculate total tracked time is this. We're going to iterate over array of tracked activities, and this array contains only those activities that we have assigned the time for. So then we're gonna call method reduce, and the first parameter of this closure will be total amount of tracked time that we're gonna use to sum up all tracked times of all activities. And the second parameter will be an activity object that we're going to receive into this closure on every loop iteration. And then we're going to calculate direct time of the particular activity, which we can do by using this function, calculate direct activity seconds. So let's move this function right here, assign result to the direct seconds constant. And then we actually have to do one more thing. Let's just use ternary expression in here and check if the direct seconds will be less than amount of seconds assigned to the current activity, which means we haven't fully finished this activity yet. And in this case, we're going to use value of the direct seconds. Otherwise, if we have completely finished this activity, we're going to use this value stored in the seconds to complete property of the current activity object. And just because we are reassigning value to the direct seconds variable, let's change this const on let. And now down here, let's just return the following expression, where on every loop iteration we're going to add direct seconds to total amount of seconds, like so. And eventually, reduce is going to return us total amount of direct seconds for all activities. But also, in order for this method reduce to work properly, we also have to specify initial value of the total variable. And we do this by using the second param. So the total should start with 0. Now let's scroll up and import this array direct activities from activities module. And as for this function, calculate activity completion percentage, that calculates percentage only for one activity. But now since we need to calculate percentage of all activities at once, we're gonna need to use a different function which we're about to create. So let's call this function calculate completion percentage, switch over to activities module, and right next to the function calculate activity completion percentage, we're going to define the new function calculate completion percentage. And the logic of calculating percentage in this function will be pretty similar to the previous function, so let's copy this line and paste it into our new function. But now we need to change some values in here, because this function calculates percentage of total amount of direct seconds for all activities. Instead of using amount of seconds for a particular activity, we need to use total direct seconds. But this value we're going to receive from outside. So let's specify first parameter in this function, total direct seconds. And as for the other value, seconds to complete. In the previous function, this variable stored amount of seconds needed to complete particular activity, but now in this case, we have to use total amount of seconds needed to complete all activities. And to calculate this value, we're going to leverage computed property, total activities seconds to complete. And just to make it clear, this variable will store the sum of these numbers. So the sum of all seconds assigned to all activities. I'm going to create a separate computed property to calculate this value. Let's call this property total activity seconds to complete. Then scroll up and start defining this property. And since this property is not going to be used outside of this module, we can keep this private. So let's use computed function and write the following logic in here. And the way we're gonna calculate total activity seconds to complete for all activities is we are firstly going to go over direct activities array and map property seconds to complete, which stores amount of seconds needed to complete a particular activity. And at the end, we're gonna receive an array which consists of all the seconds that we can simply sum up in order to find out total amount of seconds that we need to spend to finish all activities. We're basically going to use familiar approach by using method reduce to find the sum of this array. And just because this computed property is private property, it makes sense to move it to the bottom where we store all private functions and variables. So let's move it closer to generate activities private function and put it in here. So now it's time to use this function calculate completion percentage outside. In our composable function totalProgress, we already have an import for this function, so let's scroll down, and in order to calculate the completion percentage, we're going to call this function calculate completion percentage inside this computed property, and as the first parameter in here, we need to pass total amount of tracked seconds for all activities. And this total amount can be obtained by referencing total tracked seconds computed property that we have defined earlier in this lesson. After that, let's just apply auto-formatting for this file and remove this commented property. Now back to the return value and uncomment this percentage variable. So inside the header progress component, we are destructuring this returned value and receiving color class and percentage values. So both of these variables are already referenced in appropriate places of the template. Basically, we are ready to check the result in the browser. So keep an eye on that progress indicator at the top right. I'm going to choose this component in Vue Developer Tools, and let's watch these two variables that we're getting from the composable function, color class and percentage. And once I'm going to start the stopwatch to track the time for coding activity, right away I'm gonna see that the progress indicator changes, percentage is increasing, as well as those two variables change in real time. And of course, individual progress scale is also growing on the progress page. So our percentage, individual percentage for a particular activity, as well as the total percentage, seems to be showing correct values. And just to be sure, let's also try to reset the time of the stopwatch, and after this, the total percentage of the day should show 0. And that's correct, and all percentage numbers on the progress page will turn 0 as well. And just to make sure that this behavior is working fine, I'm going to spend some more time on testing. Firstly, let's go back to timeline items module, and inside that function which generates timeline items objects, I'm going to uncomment these two lines in order to assign random activities for the first 5 timeline item objects, as well as assign random times for those objects. And before going back to the browser, let's scroll up and add an import for used array of activities. So as a result, on the timeline page, we can see that some timeline item objects has random activities assigned, as well as random time. And on the progress page, turns out that all activities have been completed, and that's why the progress indicator of the day shows day complete inside the header. And now just to see that the percentage inside the header will be updating in real time, let's just assign more time for the coding activity, and after that, we can see that the percentage was updated. And now every time we're gonna change this value, the percentage will be recalculated accordingly. And finally, to see this percentage getting increased, let's start tracking the time for the coding activity and make sure this percentage will be growing, as well as the progress scale on the progress page. Everything is working fine. Let's go back to the editor. And for now, I'm going to comment out this import of array of activities, since later we might need this import for testing. And inside the generate timeline items function, let's get back those default values, null and 0 for properties, activity ID and activity seconds. And the reason why we're not removing those comments is because we occasionally refer back to these values for testing. So in this lesson, we have created another composable function useTotalProgress, which helps us calculate percentage of the total amount of tracked time of the total amount of time assigned for all activities in order to complete those activities. Let's continue our development in the next lesson.